Okay. Welcome everyone to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research virtually. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Director of Public Programs of YIVO. This is a concert that we have been planning for a long time. We're very excited about. But of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we can't be together in person, but we're very happy to be presenting this digitally instead. For those that don't know YIVO, we're a special place for the contemplation and the celebration of Jewish history and Jewish culture. At the core of YIVO is an archive and a library which contains over 23 million documents and over 400,000 books. We make those documents and books accessible to scholars and researchers from around the world. And we do a variety of programs and educational activities and exhibitions that bring those documents and the world that is documented by them to life. And among the various programs that we've done over the last few years, we've had a few programs that were dedicated to Yiddish art song and to Hebrew art song. And this is a fascinating phenomenon where composers of classical music thought it would be interesting to delve into the world of Yiddish and Hebrew folk songs and Yiddish and Hebrew poetry and use them as inspiration for their classical compositions. And so when we heard about Lori Shen's project with Sephardi art songs, we felt this was really very complementary to a lot of the things we've explored. And in fact, some of the music that she has studied is actually found in our archive as well. And some of the composers that were active writing Yiddish and Hebrew art songs also wrote Sephardi art songs. So it's a kind of intertwined complementary story. So we're really thrilled to be able to get this missing link for the story and to learn along with Lori today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lori Shen. She's a wonderful singer and scholar. She's from Turkey, and she did her graduate work here in the United States, where she wrote about Sephardi art songs. So Lori, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm overwhelmed in a good way. I just see that there's 95 people listening to me right now. That's amazing. First of all, I'd like to thank the YIVO Institute very much, also Alex Weiser, for making this happen. This is a fantastic opportunity. I'm really happy to share my research with you today. And I'm thrilled to be a part of their concert series. As Alex mentioned, we were going to do this live, but unfortunately, we're not able to do that right now. But I think it's really fantastic that we're able to do this in a way to include so many people from all around the world. This is amazing. So thank you for being here. Okay, so I'm a little technologically challenged. Let's see if I can share my screen again. I think I'll be able to do that now. Yep. All right. I hope everybody can see this right now. All right. So my Sephardic art song journey started out as a voice performance doctoral dissertation. And then it evolved into something much bigger than that. And I will share this journey with you later in my presentation, because there's somewhat of a story there. So I would like to begin with some background information pertinent to the music you will learn about today. I will talk about the Sephardim, their history, language, and culture briefly. And hopefully this will set the scene, and then I will discuss the characteristics and stylistic elements of traditional Sephardic music. Finally, I will introduce you to the Western classical arrangements of Sephardic folk songs for voice and various instruments. And I will talk about the development of the Sephardic art song genre. And of course, you will get to hear this music later in the performance portion of this event, as we performed some of these songs for you with my dear friends, Jeremy Lyons and Alexei Ulitin. And our performance will be streamed online at 4 p.m. Okay. So let's begin with the journey. All right. Sephardim are commonly known as the Jewish people who trace their ancestry back to the Iberian Peninsula, specifically to the Jews that were expelled from Spain in 1492 as a result of the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was established by the Spanish Catholic monarchs of the time, King Ferdinand II of Aragon, and Queen Isabella I of Castile. In their pursuit to achieve a religious unity in the country, they gave the Muslim Moors and the Jews of Spain only two choices: convert to Catholicism or leave. As a result, few of them did convert to Catholicism to avoid persecution, but the larger population decided to leave. So about 300,000 Jews from Spain went into exile in different directions. Portugal, from where they were expelled once more shortly after, Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean basin, including the Ottoman Empire, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. So the Sephardic culture spread to Greece, Turkey, North Africa, Palestine, Amsterdam, and Livorno, as the Sephardim migrated to these areas following the Spanish expulsion. These people, unfortunately, did not get to take many of their possessions with them as they were forced to leave, but they did carry with them something that no one could take from them: the 15th century Spanish language, from which would come a vernacular Judeo-Spanish language, which we will talk about later. But they also carried with them their culture, especially their oral literature, comprising poems, tales, and romanzas or romances, which are poems turned into songs, expressing the pain of being exiled and the nostalgia for their former homeland. Now, what exactly is the Sephardic culture? Although the word Sephardim comes from Sefarad, which means Spain in medieval Hebrew, the term has a much broader meaning. As Haim Henry Toledano states in his book, The Sephardic Legacy, Sephardic tradition is a system of values, institutions, ethnic traits, and attitudes that originated in North Africa and the Middle East, and evolved among Jews living within the orbit of the Islamic world in these areas, beginning in the early Middle Ages, before it arrived in the Iberian Peninsula. Therefore, it would be wrong to assume that the Spanish culture is some kind of a Jewish culture dipped in some Spanish culture. So I think in order to have a better understanding of the Sephardic culture, we must first discuss what a diaspora is. The word diaspora comes from Greek, meaning scattering and dispersion. In his article, Jewish Music and Diaspora, Edwin Sarusi states that diaspora is referred in Greek antiquity to a population of a specific geographical origin that became scattered throughout a wider area. And in the past half century, diaspora was adopted to describe every possible physical or imagined, voluntary or forced, displacement of individuals or communities from their real or imaginary homeland for multiple reasons. It could be political, economic, racial, religious, etc. He later adds that diaspora is most effective as an explanatory tool when applied to the existence of an identified population that feels that it is away from its homeland, however imagined, however distant in time and space, and more subtly, that it involves more than demographics. Some sort of consciousness of separation, a gap, a disjuncture must be present. So the Jewish populations in Europe, North Africa, and the Arab and Persian Near East in the early medieval period were already diasporic populations. The forced and voluntary migrations from these locations later on created further displacements, of course. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain and later Portugal resulted in a classic example of a second stage displacement that sometimes generated an overemphasized longing for a lost homeland. And music became the field of cultural expression in which diaspora had one of its strongest showings against its rhetorical negation. As I mentioned earlier, the Jews were expelled from Spain. They carried with them their most precious belonging, the 15th century Spanish language. This language of the Sephardim can be referred to as Ladino, Judeo-Espagnol, or Judesmo. Ladino is essentially 14th and 15th century Castilian, with contributions from Gallego-Portuguese, Catalan, Valencian, Aragonese, Hebrew, Turkish, Arabic, and other languages such as Greek, French, Italian, and Balkan languages. Surprisingly, the presence of Hebrew in Ladino is in fact very little. However, strong traces of Turkish, French, Italian, and Greek can be found in Ladino, as the Sephardim did not live self-sufficiently in their own state. They may have had quarters in the large towns they settled in, but they were never the only inhabitants of those towns. And here's an interesting fact. It was at the end of the 19th century that the Castilian Spanish was discovered by the Jews and Judeo-Spanish by the Spaniards. It is crucial to point out that Judeo-Spanish is not a series of juxtapositions of all these languages mentioned, but it is a complex code, one of whose constituent parts is multilingualism and the play on languages. A certain linguistic creativity is inherent to Judeo-Spanish, which has even been used as a vehicle for expressing verbal revenge through humor in an oppressive society. Here is an example from Varol's book. Dr. Maimonides is apparently what one says to someone who poses and claims to be smart. Have you heard of this name before, Maimonides? Perhaps I can't get any feedback from you right now, but I'm guessing 50-50. Some have heard it, some haven't. He's known as Rambam also, and he was a 12th century philosopher from Cordoba, and apparently also one of the greatest Jewish scholars of all times. So it makes sense, right? If someone calls you Dr. Maimonides, they think you're very smart. Actually wrong, and here's why. In Turkish, Maymun means monkey. And in one of the lectures I gave before, I found out that in Greek also, Maymun means monkey. And the Greek idis is how the Greeks of the Black Sea area form family names, which means that that person is in fact calling you a monkey, and a Greek one too. So I would like to quote Varol here. Irony, distance, puns, the endless plays on meanings and stylistic nuances bouncing back and forth make this language of quotations, double entendres, discrete jokes that seem undecipherable, of implied or overly clear meanings, into an original and eternally renewed linguistic system steeped in a devastating sense of humor that can only be achieved through a knowledge of several languages. A knowledge that gives it its strength, its richness, and its freedom. So the areas in which Ladino was spoken went beyond the lens of the Ottoman Empire, where the Sephardim were accepted in great numbers under the ruling of Sultan Bayezid II around the time of the expulsion from Spain. According to Varol, there was a Judeo-Spanish community in Bucharest and another in Vienna that saw a considerable development in the 19th century. Vienna even became one of the principal publishing centers of Judeo-Spanish at the beginning of the 20th century. Finally, France, North and South America became an emigration pole for Spanish Jews between the two world wars. After the Second World War, nothing was left of the prestigious community of Salonika, and the communities of Yugoslavia, Greece, France, Austria, and Romania were decimated. The Bulgarian community managed to emigrate, mainly to Palestine, and the Turkish community was preserved. So today, Judeo-Spanish is spoken sporadically in large European and American cities, and in a more consistent way in Turkey, in Istanbul and Izmir, and in Israel. Nowadays, Ladino has come to refer to the more corrupt Judeo-Spanish vernacular spoken mainly by the Sephardim of the Eastern Mediterranean. All right, so where is the Sephardim today? It has been over 500 years since the Spanish Inquisition happened, and even more displacement took place since then, some voluntary and some not. Today, Sephardim includes the Ladino-speaking Sephardim of Turkey and other Balkan countries, the Spanish and Portuguese Sephardim of Amsterdam, London, and New York, and other US cities, the Middle East Sephardim of Egypt, Iraq, and Syria, and the Sephardim of North Africa, as well as Latin America. So, throughout their 500-year-long journey after being expelled from Spain, the Sephardim migrated all over the world, and their culture and traditions, their language, as well as their folk literature have evolved throughout these 500 years. The scattered Sephardim became members of larger communities and adopted the culture and languages of their newfound homeland. Especially today, it's rather challenging to define Sephardism from an ethnical, geographical, or linguistic point of view. I will agree with Haim Henry Toledano in his statement that the only valid definition can be a cultural one. He defines Sephardim as all Jews who trace their ancestry to any main historical region of Sephardic culture and tradition just mentioned, and who share and cherish the Sephardic tradition and heritage as it was transmitted from one generation to another. The fascinating fact is that a certain Spanish element in the Sephardic identity endured long after any connection to Spain did. In her book, The Jews of Spain, Jane Gerber exemplifies this as she writes, "How strange it seems that Sephardim scattered in Turkey and Bulgaria, Curaçao and Pernambuco, sang ballads about medieval Spanish knights and maidens in their medieval Spanish language, Ladino. Throughout the Turkish-speaking world, the conversation of Sephardic Jews, especially women, would be peppered with Spanish proverbs. The classical genres of Spanish oral literature would be preserved for centuries in the Balkans, in romances, as each important life cycle event was marked by Jewish festivities rich in Spanish song. Today, the 2.2 million Sephardim are scattered all around the world, but we are still able to talk about the Sephardic culture, about Sephardic traditions, about an unusual language called Ladino that is specific to Sephardim, and of course the Sephardic folk literature, including the traditional folk songs. Sephardic music offers a window into the history and culture of the Sephardim and the diverse influences of the Sephardic culture. To quote scholars Samuel Armistead, Joseph Silverman, and Israel Katz, the folk song tradition of Sephardim is both medieval and modern, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic, Hispanic, but also Balkan and Near Eastern, and indeed French and Italian as well. For all its seeming conservatism, the Sephardic song tradition is a vital, dynamic, creative phenomenon, forever involved in the ongoing process of becoming something different from what it was before. Which brings us to the music. The traditional Sephardic song repertoire is consisted of a few categories. The main three secular categories are romances, coplas, and cantigas. Romances are narrative poems similar to the French ballade, and the narrative is mostly related to the Spanish Middle Ages, involving stories and tales of kings and knights, prisoners, faithful and unfaithful wives, as well as historical and biblical themes. Romances are characterized by being rendered as solo songs with no instrumental accompaniment, sung mostly by women who are also responsible for the preservation and transmission of this repertoire. Coplas, on the other hand, are strophic poems set to music, and these songs reflect the influence of surrounding musical cultures. This genre flourished in the 17th and 18th centuries, and therefore the texts tend to be a little more modern. These songs are usually about Jewish tradition and history, values and beliefs, and social and political events. They can revolve around important community figures, economic hardship, specific holidays, or moral themes. Coplas are rendered mostly in group singing, often accompanied by hand clapping. And since many coplas appear in written sources, they belong to the realm of men, who would be able to read the Hebrew letters used for writing Ladino in printed text at the time. The third one, cantigas. Cantigas are similar to coplas, but cantigas reflect the influence of the surrounding music cultures more evidently. Some of these songs are basically Ladino translations or adaptations of Turkish, French, and Balkan songs, and the music borrows elements from dance tunes such as tango and foxtrot, and the music quotes operettas and zarzuelas at times. Unlike romances and coplas, cantigas do not necessarily have a narrative, and they usually have lyrical themes, dealing with love, longing, mourning, and so on. In addition to these secular categories, most resources also mention two other types of Sephardic songs, which are oraciones, meaning prayer songs, and endechas, or oinas, meaning dirges. And since this repertoire represents such a wide range of cultural exchange, the musical analyses of them require a vast musical knowledge. These songs have complex musical characteristics, since the music gradually became a fusion of all the musical cultures the Sephardim were exposed to. Sephardic music possesses elements of Western classical music of all periods, starting from medieval, Spanish, Moroccan, Balkan, and Greek musical traditions, and Turkish folk and classical forms, including makam. Now let me talk about makam a little bit. Makam is the Middle Eastern modal practice with more pitches than we are used to in our Western 12-tone notation system. So to give you an example, here's the 12 tones of the Western notation system. I'm not sure if everybody could hear this. I'm just going to play it one more time. So these are the 12 pitches from the first do to the next do. Okay, so this modal system, makam, differs greatly from the Western chromatic system. As you just heard, the Western 12-tone system has 12 pitches, each a semitone apart from one another. For example, the Turkish makam system involves 24 pitches that are quarter tone apart from one another. The notation of these extra pitches requires some accidentals we are not familiar with in the Western classical notation. You can see some of these weird accidentals on this slide. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but these are the notations used in the makam system. So Sephardic music possesses some makam flavor, although not in such complexity. Some typical makam intervals, such as augmented seconds, jump out at you as they are the intervals that give the songs an oriental flavor. And here's an example of a makam scale. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it.
Lori, sorry to interrupt. The audio is not working. I think if you, for the playing back, I think if you try sharing your screen again, and just when you do it, on the bottom there's a button that says share computer audio. So if you click that button when you share your screen, it should work then.
Let me see. Share screen. Oh, share computer sound.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
And then maybe you could play the diatonic again and the thank you so much. Sorry.
Yes, of course. Do you mind letting me know if this works? Let me just play. This is a 12-tone system. Are you able to hear it now?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, great. So this was a 12-tone system, the Western system. And here's an example of a makam scale. So, in traditional Sephardic folk songs, we can expect to see and hear the following. As I just mentioned, there's a makam flavor. So, before I come to the instrumentation, Sephardic song repertoire is essentially vocal, although musical instruments were also used at times, mostly on special occasions. When instruments were involved in the performances of these songs at family gatherings or at bigger occasions, the typical instruments used were percussion instruments, such as tambourine, but also mandolin or oud, which are string instruments that belong to the lute family. Other percussion instruments used included castanets, finger cymbals, darbuka or dümbelek, and baraban. Another musical characteristic of this repertoire is compound rhythms used in complex rhythmic patterns. Rhythms such as 5/8, 7/8, or 9/8, for example, are very unusual in Western music. Let me give you an example. What does 5/8 mean for the audience members that are not familiar with these terms? So 5/8 would be, for example, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. This is a compound rhythm rather than, in the Western music, we usually hear rhythms like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. They're all super equal. Whereas in compound rhythms, there's some kind of complexity, like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. This is partly a Greek and Balkan influence, as interesting dance rhythms can be observed in their music. The traditional versions of these songs, as opposed to the Western classical art song versions, incorporate a lot of improvisation as well. This is hardly surprising, as these songs were transmitted orally, and oral transmission encourages personal improvisation that often consists of lavish ornamentation and relatively free rhythm. Therefore, the melodies of the same Sephardic songs can differ tremendously from community to community or generation to generation. I would also like to remind here that the texts of most of these songs were anonymous. In the Western classical arrangements of Sephardic folk songs, which you will hear me perform later, the makam scales and intervals, such as augmented seconds, are incorporated into the music in a tonal compositional approach. The melodies are both modal and tonal, and both Western and non-Western in character. These arrangements sometimes have very complex rhythms. However, they exclude traditional instruments and dispose of the ornamentations. So, what is the story behind the emergence of Sephardic songs within the Western classical medium? The 19th century witnessed a nationalist movement in Europe that presented itself in various fields. This movement became quite evident in music, as folklorists, music scholars, as well as some Western classical composers began to explore the folk literature of nations in search of national identities. Thus, folklore of many European nations was collected and transcribed in the late 19th and early 20th century. Although the focus of this pursuit was on non-Western music and literature, many Western classical composers were inspired by this material in expressing a national identity in their music. The 20th century Western classical composers' interest in collecting and arranging Sephardic songs can also be traced back to this nationalist movement in music. In late 19th century and the first decade of the 20th century Russia, the young Jewish composers of the time got inspired by the nationalist movement in Russian music, exemplified by Russian composers. And they became attracted to the idea of representing a Jewish identity in music. And so they collected and transcribed perhaps thousands of Yiddish folk songs. This Jewish national revival inspired some other European classical composers to incorporate Jewish musical elements in their compositions as well. And a similar interest appeared in the Sephardic musical realm pioneered by the Turkish Jewish composer and ethnomusicologist Alberto Hemsi. Hemsi perhaps was not the first to collect and transcribe Sephardic folk songs and poems, as there were already other musicologists that had begun this project. However, Hemsi not only contributed to these transcriptions with his own fieldwork, but he also arranged and harmonized about 60 of these with a Western classical approach. It was not only Hemsi that showed interest in arranging these songs in the Western classical tradition. There were many others, actually over 45 composers. And how did I find out about this? Now the story, it's time for my story. There's a little bit of a story there. So here we go. As Alex mentioned, I'm from Turkey, and I am a member of the Sephardic Jewish community in Izmir. I don't know if you can see it there. And that's my paternal grandfather there with his mother, aunts, siblings, and cousins. So naturally, I have always been interested in information related to Sephardim. And a couple of years ago, when I was pursuing my doctorate at the University of Maryland, I serendipitously stumbled upon the famous Spanish classical composer Joaquin Rodrigo's work, Cuatro Canciones Sefardis. This work of his is a set of 4 songs set to anonymous Ladino texts adapted by his wife, Victoria Campi. And considering my Sephardic heritage, of course, I was intrigued. And through quick research, I found out that Victoria Campi was a Turkish Jewish pianist who was born into a Sephardic family in Istanbul. After I found out about this work, I was curious to see if there were other Western classical works inspired by traditional Sephardic folk songs. So I decided to go on a quest. And throughout my research, I found so many Western classical Sephardic works that I had to create an Excel document to compile them under one roof. The list kept expanding, and eventually I decided to create a catalog out of my findings and publish that in my dissertation as well, because I realized that no such information or catalog existed anywhere. Just a few words about who these Western classical composers are. The first name on the chronological list of Sephardic art song composers is Lucien Ben-Haim, a Swiss composer who published his 5 arrangements under the title 5 chansons populaires Judeo-Espagnol in 1920, which also happens to be the earliest work on my catalog. I'm not sure if he was Jewish himself, but research of Sephardic music scholar Edwin Sarusi suggests that Ben-Haim was introduced to the Sephardic culture through the Sephardic Jews he encountered in Paris, who were immigrants from Turkey and Greece that arrived in France after the First World War. Ben-Haim learned these songs from Madame Judith Pichon, a Sephardic Jew from Izmir. Of course, I will not be able to talk about each composer on the catalog today. However, I wanted to use this work as an example to point out that although some of these composers of Western classical Sephardic works were Jewish themselves, some were non-Jewish composers who were either inspired by this culture or repertoire, or they were commissioned by organizations, musicians, or others to create Sephardic works. And in your programs for the performance portion of this event, you will find some information about the composers of the works you will hear. All right, so let me see. Okay, so the catalog currently includes composers from Turkey, Israel, Spain, Italy, Germany, France, the United States, Canada, Puerto Rico, and some other countries. And as of today, I have identified 43 different classical composers who have arranged over 190 Sephardic songs in the Western classical tradition for voice and various instruments. And I commissioned 2 composers other than the 43 to contribute to my project with their own original Sephardic songs. Certainly there are more works out there, and I will track them down all eventually. Some of these 100 and 90 different songs were arranged by multiple composers. So on the catalog, there are over 390 different arrangements or art songs. So I keep referring to this genre as Sephardic art songs. So I would like to talk briefly about what art song is. Why am I not calling them just songs or folk songs? What is art song? Okay, let me start by defining what a folk song is. Folk songs are usually sung unaccompanied or with accompaniment provided by a single instrument, like a guitar or a dulcimer, and they are usually learned by ear and are very rarely written down. So they're susceptible to changes of notes and words through generations of oral transmission. Composers of most folk songs are unknown, and the traditional Sephardic songs fit into this category really well. Whereas art song is a vocal genre that is rooted in medieval Europe, although today the term is more often used in reference to the Western classical solo vocal literature created and performed in the German Lied tradition. When compared to the folk song genre, art songs are much more rigid in form, and they tend to be more sophisticated musically and technically. Art songs are intended for well-trained musicians and classical vocalism. Art songs are generally accompanied by piano or an instrumental ensemble. The notes are written down, and both notes and the text are not casually altered after that. So there's quite a distinction between folk song and art song from the Western classical music perspective. And after finding so many Western classical Sephardic vocal works, I took the liberty of treating it as a genre and giving this genre the name Sephardic art song. You will get to experience the difference between a traditional folk song and the Western classical setting of it during our performance later. But let me give you a quick example. Okay, now we established that you can hear what I'm playing here as well. Let's see if this is going to work. Are you able to hear this? Okay, so this is the song Ventanas Altas. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. So you heard the folk song version of this song, a very popular Sephardic song. And here is, you will hear this version later on in today's performance as well, but just to give you a quick idea, this is a Western classical setting of the same song, very same song. So to conclude, my research and performances aim to raise awareness about a rich Sephardic repertoire within the Western classical medium, one that also offers a window into the Sephardic culture and history. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that enlightening presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for the opportunity.
So I think we have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box right there. And meanwhile, I'm going to also just send in the chat the link for where we can view the concert, which is going to be starting at 4 p.m. So make sure you go over to that YouTube link. And I also included the link for the program booklet, which contains a lot of really wonderful information about all the music and all the song texts in both Ladino and in translation. Um, so now we have some questions are coming in. Lori,
Okay.
do you have CDs that people can buy? Where can they get them?
Not yet. Not yet. Fingers crossed. Maybe soon.
Okay, well,
We're
stay
actually
tuned,
planning
everyone.
on recording. Yes, but I mean, I try to put my performances on YouTube, so you would be able to find them on YouTube for now.
Wonderful. Um, Here's another question. Is the maqam kind of like a minor key? Maybe you could explain a little bit more what a maqam is.
Uh, Not really. So, for example, okay, how do we explain this? In the Western classical tradition, when we think of a scale, let's say a C major scale, we're thinking of 8 notes from the first C to the octave of it, right? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. So in maqam, the intervals are simply different. And it really depends on the type of scale, the type of the maqam scale. There are, instead of being one whole step or a half step away from the note, there may be a step and a half or step and a quarter. So the intervals are quite different because the instruments are designed or constructed in a way to produce these sounds that are in between the tones we're familiar with in the Western classical system. Does that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just add, because
Okay,
my own background is also as a musician.
right.
If you're familiar with, say, the piano, and it has all the
Mm-hmm.
white keys and all the black keys, the music that Lori is speaking about, the notes that she's speaking about, are not on the piano. They're between notes.
Mm-hmm.
So the maqam
Exactly.
is a different way of organizing musical sound. It's actually kind of outside of the system we're used to
Mm-hmm.
as the Western classical system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, lots more questions are pouring in.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah. Ilana Lemberger says, "Thank you. My maternal grandfather was born in Izmir too. I look forward to your
Oh,
concert.
wow.
Very sweet."
Thank
As
you.
we say in Yiddish, a Welt mit Weltlach, which means a little world, basically, but it's a colorful way of saying it in Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
A few people have asked, is your dissertation available to read, or is there a way for them to see this full list? People are very curious.
Um, it should be available online by now. So through the school website, University of Maryland, I think the dissertation should be available by now. I mean, I had asked them to publish it online when I submitted it, but I know that it takes a while for them to put it in their system. It must be available. If not, I mean, I'm happy to send it to you. Whoever is interested, you can email me or let me know. I'll just email it to you. I'm happy to share.
Wonderful. And Laura, you have a website. Maybe you could tell people what your website is.
Oh, it's www.lorisen.com.
Okay, wonderful. Some people, Mona Albala, so sorry if I pronounced that
Okay.
name wrong, asks, what is the influence of flamenco music on Sephardic music, or vice versa? They heard a connection there.
Actually, I don't know. I mean, again, Sephardic music is a fusion of a lot of genres because wherever this population went to, they were exposed to different cultures and different music, and they took in whatever they were surrounded by. So if there was flamenco music around them, of course they were inspired by that, and the music was influenced by flamenco too. I just don't know about the specifics or the details, unfortunately.
Yeah, I see some people have their hands raised. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box right there. That's how we're doing questions. Lots more great questions. We may not have time to get to all of them, but
Mm-hmm.
I will encourage you join us for the concert, of course, on YouTube, which I sent the link in the chat, and Lori hopefully will join us there as well, and I will
Sure.
be there, and we can chat more on the chat of the YouTube. And it'll also be on Facebook if you prefer Facebook at Evo's Facebook. Okay, here's another question. Is there any crossover between Ladino and Yiddish songs? As of interesting element that you mentioned, that the kind of Yiddish song collection, is there any crossover there that you could speak about?
I mean, the crossover would be just the idea behind the Western classical settings of these songs, because they basically took the folk tunes and created a Western classical version of it. And the same goes with the Yiddish folk songs as well. But musically, I'm guessing there are a lot of differences. First of all, the language is different, and the surrounding cultures were different, you know, when it comes to the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardic Jews. So the musical influences would be different.
I'll just, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, the overlap is just the way they were created. But other than that, I'm not sure.
Judith R. Cohen has said that she wrote, published an article about this.
Oh,
So perhaps there's
fantastic.
more interesting information out there. And I will mention also that one of the things that I discovered after reading Laurie's dissertation and doing a little bit of research at YIVO is that in some cases, it wasn't super common, but there were some composers that were invested in Yiddish art song that also wrote some Ladino art songs. So there is, I think, that connection about, you know, the interest and why people are interested in it. It also extended to even music making in some cases.
And thank you, Judith, for sharing your article information.
Can you give one or two suggestions of folk and art music available on CD that you would recommend?
Oh, any folk song, I'm pretty sure any of the folk songs, popular folk songs, will be available in the Western classical version as well. So I would look for Adio Querida, Los Bilbilicos, all the, you know, top 3, 4 songs. Yeah, I mean, if you just Google it, or you know, if you just go on YouTube, you will be able to find both versions for sure.
Yeah, YouTube is an amazing resource.
Yeah.
Martin Bobrowski says some quote purists use Ladino for written works and Degesmo for the spoken language. Do you agree?
Actually, I mean, I'm not a linguist. I'm not sure what the specific differences are. For me, Ladino is Ladino, right? Like I grew up in a culture where the language was spoken all around me, and for me, there's only one Ladino. Whereas the way it's been used may have been different in different fields or different countries, perhaps among different populations, communities. So I'm not sure what the exact difference is between Judesmo and Ladino.
Okay. Daisy says, I'm from Izmir too. Are you related to Sami Shen?
Yes, but which one? There are a few Samishans. If you're talking about the medical doctor, yes, he passed away some years ago, but yeah, he was my grandfather.
Wonderful. Let's see. Dan Menashe says, are the intervals of a makam scale regular, or do the size of the intervals vary?
They vary. So I believe in the Turkish makam system, there's 24. So there are 24 pitches, but overall in the Middle Eastern makam, sorry, the scale number is over 72. Yeah, so intervals will be different for each makam scale. That's why there's so many.
It's a long answer. It's a complicated story. The full explanation of makam scales.
Yeah. Also, it's a different genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about a Turkish song that sounds something like Oglan Oglan? My family from Gallipoli played this music at every gathering.
Olan Olan. I've never heard of it. Perhaps if we heard the melody a little bit,
Well,
perhaps the name, the title is different.
Well, that's from Elaine. Perhaps Elaine you can reach out to Laurie if there's more to explore there. There's a lot of comments here in the questions. Nadim Toker says, "Dear Laurie, do you have any plan to have a concert in Turkey?"
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to the next time I visit. We actually had a wonderful Spanish and Sephardic art songs concert with a former professor of mine, Lynette Cho. She's a fantastic classical singer, also a professor at 9 Eylül University State Conservatory in Izmir. We had a wonderful concert together about a year and a half ago. And I mean, as soon as I come back to Turkey again, because it's been a year and a half since the last time I was there, I'd love to get together with her and do it again.
Wonderful. Well, there are a lot of questions, but I want to give people a few minutes to go over to YouTube to make sure that they don't miss the opening of the concert and maybe have a second to grab a glass of water or something. So
Okay.
I chatted the link to the YouTube link to the YouTube performance in the chat. Please let me know if you have any problems. It's also at Yivo's Facebook page. So if you go to Yivo, if you go to Facebook and search for Yivo, it'll be there premiering up at the top at 4 p.m. And Lori, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I also highly recommend everybody to download the program because there's information about composers and some of the songs. There's translations of the texts, so it's quite useful.
And the program is linked also in the chat, and it's also linked on the YouTube video itself. If once you get to YouTube, in the description, there's a link to the program. There's also a link to the program in the description of the Facebook. So wherever you go, you should be able to find it. And thank you
Oh,
all
I
so
just see
much.
that Diana was here too. Thank you, Diana. I just saw her message. Diana Castelnuovo-Tedesco. We
Wonderful,
will,
wonderful.
yeah, we will be performing her grandfather's set of Sephardic songs as well. It's in the program. Super excited.
Amazing.